All right, so we're here today talking to Hannah about Uniquely Human by Dr. Barry Prizant. Seems like trust is a big theme of this book, and building trust with the kiddos that you interact with through your work as an occupational therapist.
The core of occupational therapy is to be a part of a team that the individual creates with themselves in it, that creates meaningful occupation and participation and quality of life, explores that as what does that look like for me as an individual, as a unique human in this big world. Without trust as the base of that, as a team member, um, my participation in that team, at best, it's perfunctory and like, whatever, just go away, you non-functional person on the team. And at worst, it's traumatic because as the OT, there's a possibility that I would come in and give these like, do these things. And without trust, there's no reason that my direction should be there.
Like when I read this book when Luna was about 2.5, shortly after her autism diagnosis. And I read this book and I was like, oh, that makes sense. And it really put me on a journey, like building on what I had learned from Self-Reg by Stuart Shanker about nervous system regulation and co-regulation. This was the next step, the cognitive piece of being a detective, to wonder why.
One of the questions that we're asking panelists is whether you see this come up in your practice in terms of developing and building trust as being essential. It seems to be a big theme of this book in terms of the children that you interact with on a daily basis.
This is not a kid thing. This is an every human thing. Everyone needs to feel safe. Trust and safety come first for people of all ages.
How do I cue safety, which we talk a lot about? How do I invite another person into connection with me? How do I get myself invited into their connection? Because I have to work to get invited in. And then once that's happened, how do I show up in authenticity and in belief enough times that nervous system now trusts my nervous system?
You know, as a teacher, are there ways that you work on building, sort of a sphere of trust with the children that you work with?
Yeah, it's going to sound a little cheesy, but I think being uniquely human kind of does that. So I am my own self with each kid that I work with.
Yeah.
And I listen to who each student is. I really truly think that kids can feel when you authentically care about them and are happy to have meaningful conversations with them and listen to who they are and what they need and what they want to tell you.
Yeah. Another thing that seemed to come out of the book was the idea of sort of digging beneath behaviors, looking at behaviors. And this is where it sort of reminded me a little bit of, Ross Green and collaborative proactive solutions, and the idea of like the behavior is just the signal, it's just the fever, like Dr. Green says, kind of digging beneath that and looking at, what's going on underneath. Does that resonate with you?
It definitely does. And I think I love Ross Green of looking at those lagging skills. And I love looking at those skills where they're flourishing as well.
Yeah.
And that book really did bring that up. So I think when we work to eliminate behaviors without understanding their purpose, behaviors that are signals that we need something, a need that's not met. He really went into it in the book, talking about being a detective and how it was our job to do that. There was one story that I felt was so fitting because I do have students who I never can quite figure out what it is that is causing an issue. And it was a story about driving through a neighborhood, and one of the buildings reminded him, the student, of something else. And the parents were able to piece that together. But so often when we have little pieces of who a student is, it's hard to piece those together, for sure.
Can you talk to me a little bit more about, your beliefs around behaviors and how they present and what that means?
Yeah. The information given to me by another nervous system is always when I have access to it, which I do and work a lot, is met with curiosity. And it's very much met with like, okay, something is being communicated to me that I need to understand, because I'm the adult, because I'm the professional, because I'm in the role of of figuring this out, of being a part of this, that is coming to it with genuine curiosity and presumed competence and belief in meaningful occupation and belief in participation. So if I'm getting communication that something is not gelling within this other nervous system, that's the curiosity of like the task analysis, the little Rolodex in my head that I start to go through.
What are some ways that you dig beneath behaviors when you're looking at somebody's behaviors?
So somebody does a thing, and I automatically ask to myself first, I wonder why that's happening. And like as a parent, I learned that from this book. What are the factors in the environment? Or actually, like, I think like rewinding of like the algorithm of like what goes on up there is like, I see behavior, and I presume dysregulation. I just presume it. It's like, that would not have happened if that person were regulated. So then I wonder, why are they dysregulated? I wonder, what are the factors of the environment? What are the cognitive aspects? What were the expectations? What are the access needs that are not met? Like the interpersonal, the interpersonal access needs. And then I find a way to like, I hypothesis test about that. And then I like check whether I'm correct. When the person's regulated, I might make some comment like, I noticed in the middle of the night that you flipped your lid. I wonder if it's because you were expecting daddy to transport you to your room. And that didn't happen. And then my 6-year-old might tell me yes or no, whether I'm correct. But this is like a debrief. It's like the see behavior, wonder why, hypothesis form, test hypothesis. Like that's how my algorithm works.
I really like the double empathy piece that's come into conversation a lot lately too. Like, all right, we're all human, and this nervous system has had a day where they're taxed, and that's totally a part of the reality of walking this earth in community, and kind of breaking away from having that like spotlight on one person that really like diffuse that light, and like, yeah, a lot of people are having hard days, and on we go. Hold space for that, allow it to be there, and accept it as a part of the communication of the day. And then not to discount when those behaviors are things that are painful, self-injurious behaviors, like when those behaviors become things that attention needs to be given to, then absolutely we dive deeper as a team and say, what's the function of this behavior? Why are we picking at our lips until they bleed? Why are we picking at our cuticles till they bleed? Why are we smashing our head with our fist in response to things? Like those behaviors and others, absolutely, that becomes the part where there is a reason for the algorithm, for the model where it says this thing needs to change. How do we change the environment to affect this behavior? How do we change the expectations to change this behavior? What are the things in this orbit that can help provide safety when this behavior is unsafe?
So I would say that trust is an essential ingredient for safety, and safety comes first, right? So like if you don't feel safe within the context of a relationship, nothing else happens. Like, so, safety, then engagement, then communication, then et cetera, like if you don't feel safe, nothing else happens. And so what I see in my practice, people of all ages don't feel safe. Luna would be just like constantly flipping her lid, And I read in Uniquely Human this example of having like a board that told the child in the book like where their person was. So like we developed like a daddy board, and we would like write what room of the house daddy is in at all times, and like just doing that to signal safety, that went such a hugely far away, because at any given time Luna could refer to the daddy board on the refrigerator, and like, you know, and we just had an arrow of like upstairs or downstairs, what floor of the house is daddy on, and like that helped regulation tremendously.
There was a portion of the book where they talked about classifying typical autistic behaviors as autistic behaviors, and he spoke to a group in the book, if I'm remembering it correctly, and asked, what kind of behaviors are you talking about? And it was things like, well, flapping. And he was saying, well, when I get anxious, they tap my feet, or talking to yourself. And it was another person who said, you know, I also talk to myself all the time when I'm thinking things through or when I'm cleaning. And so many of the behaviors that we label as autistic behaviors really are just common human behaviors that we're all doing. And we do use them to regulate, but with this idea that we do that ourselves in private, or that it's wrong. And so we don't show those feelings. And when we think of this as a way for students to regulate, we stop looking at things like bouncing on the rug during morning meeting, or like not gazing into your eyes or looking at you. Those aren't necessarily signs that a student isn't engaged and isn't learning. Those are signs that a student is regulating their bodies so that they can be attending and so that they can be learning. And I think it's so important to remember that.
I think that so much we get stuck in changing, and this, I mean, Uniquely Human was so wonderful about kind of affirming this and giving it language. We so much want to change the individual to fit in our perceptions of the world. And if we can look at the world as a wonderfully diverse and expansive place, and then community as that, then how do we create the environment that allow the individual to be uniquely who they are? And I want that for myself. And so why not give that as a base of it for everybody we interact with?
The other part that I thought was really huge was just one line in the book that I thought really resonated. And it was talking about, rather than autism spectrum disorder, that idea of neurotypical spectrum disorder, where it's really easy to ask that perspective taking from autistic people of why people do things. So explaining, oh, he said that, but he didn't really mean it. And when you look at it the other way, it's, but why would you say it if you didn't mean it? So that kind of perspective taking from both sides, and looking at the idea that both neurotypical and neurodivergent people have different ways of expressing things, and not all of the ways that neurotypical humans express things really make sense. It's a book that I've looked back on and reflected on in my own practice and in my own life, and really taking a skill-based viewpoint, and some of the things that came from it were huge, and there were parts that I didn't love. And it's a nice reminder that this was written quite a while ago, and we've learned, and as we get new information and learn more, we put that to use. So we're so much further along now in our understanding of what is expected and what is appreciated within all of society, that I think we're looking now at these uniquely human humans all around us.
After I read this book, I bought a bunch of copies of it and gave it to everyone working with my child. I did that for years.
You know, just kind of, there's a lot about the intentionality of how I work and how I feel like OT has the capacity to work, where it's, I find joy in the joy of whatever is happening in the moment. Like it can be, and the range of things all hold the same amount of joy. Vacuum cleaners to Pokemon cards, to fairy houses, to world politics. All of those things, the joy is actually in, for me, the joy is in finding the person who's finding joy in the activity or the topic or the action. And that's that just that creates a connection. I'm so happy that you are happy about these things, and I want to know more about that happiness and that joy.
All these years later, it's still just incredible to me how many professionals don't see the world this way, and they don't have this paradigm. It's not the way they were trained. And like, we wonder why there's chaos, right? Because safety comes first. And if the basic paradigm through which you see the world ultimately has a huge implication for the relationship. If you are seeing someone through a deficit-based lens, they feel it and they're not gonna feel safe with you.